Common law versus legislation. Here in the United States, we live under a common law system. Law professor John Hasnas explains, almost none of the rules that bring peace and order to our existence were created by government. On the contrary, he says, it is precisely the rules that were created by government that tend to undermine peace and order. English common law is, in fact, case-generated law. That is, law that spontaneously evolves from the settlement of actual disputes. Almost all of the law that provides the infrastructure of our contemporary society was created in this way. Tort law, which provides protection against personal injury. Property law, which demarcates property rights. Contract law, which provides the grounding for exchange. Commercial law, which facilitates complex business transactions. And even criminal law, which punishes harmful behavior, all arose through this evolutionary process. What does the professor mean when he says, on the contrary, those rules that were created by government tend to undermine peace and order? Here's another quote from the book Law, Order, and Power. Quote, every detailed study of the emergence of legal norms has consistently shown the immense importance of interest group activity, not the public interest, as the critical variable in determining the content of legislation. End quote. What this person says is that interest groups vie for legislative privileges. In fact, the interest groups might themselves even write the legislation. And in fact, the legislators might not even read the legislation before they are passed into law. I'd like to do a comparison of the common law versus legislation. The source of the common law is the resolution of disputes. That is, people have found out what rules facilitate peaceful coexistence, which is their purpose. Legislation, on the other hand, its source is government decree, and its purpose is to impose some sort of a social vision. For example, legislation might say certain people should not receive a low wage, so we're going to raise a minimum wage. Or they might say that certain land should not be developed, so they're going to impose zoning laws or building restrictions. The focus of the common law is restitution, that is, making the victim whole. The focus of legislation tends to be more about punishment, that is, punishing the wrongdoers for breaking the law. The common law enjoys widespread support. On the other hand, legislation tends to receive substantial resistance. The reason is because legislation tends to pit some groups' interests against other groups. Those groups who lose out in the struggle offer resistance to this legislation. Under the common law, property rights tend to be respected because that's what facilitates peaceful coexistence. Legislation, on the other hand, makes property rights insecure. The common law tends to preserve liberty because, after all, restricting people's freedom does not lead to peaceful coexistence. Government legislation does tend to restrict people's liberty because that's the only way that a social vision can be imposed on a community. The common law tends to be very accessible, that is, it's common sense. The common law imposes on people a duty to take reasonable care not to injure other people. That's something that's easily understood by almost everybody. Legislation, on the other hand, tends to be extraordinarily complex. No one, not even experts in the field, can be sure that they fully understand all the nuances of legislation, such as the tax code, for example. The common law tends to be slow to change. If you were to take a trip away from the country for a decade or two and then come back, you would expect to see basically the same structures of common law. On the other hand, legislation can be subject to rapid change. If there is a new party that's voted in, they can roll back much of what the previous party did and implement new changes of their own. The enforcement of the common law can be through various means. Enforcement tends to be fairly straightforward because of its widespread support and because it's focused on restitution. Those people who have been victimized have strong interest in prosecuting the offenders. Government legislation relies on the public police for enforcement. Much of legislation is victimless crimes, for example, not having a certain permit or license, in which case there is no victim that has motivation to report these crimes and aid in the prosecution of them.